I remember in the late 90s, in the early days of emulation, there were some SNES games that didn't work on emulators because they used special chips that developers hadn't figured out how to emulate yet. One of these chips was the SDD one. It is used to decompress massive amounts of sprite data. Thanks to this chip, they were able to accomplish the incredible feat of releasing Street Fighter Alpha 2 on the SNES. This port is far inferior to the original arcade version, but it's still quite impressive to see this game on the SNES. The only other SNES game to use the SDD1 chip was Star Ocean. The crazy thing is that since this game was released on July 19, 1996, when SNES emulation was just starting to become a thing, Star Ocean was still a relatively new game. I remember tinkering with emulators like Z-SNES and SNES 9X around 1998 or 1999. So being so new and using such a rare chip, I guess it was to be expected that Star Ocean hadn't been emulated yet. Heck, transparencies weren't even emulated in SNES games back then. Then, sometime in the early 2000s, Star Ocean finally worked on emulators. And it wasn't long before it got an English translation patch. The Jap's English patch, released on December 31st, 2003, still holds up incredibly well today. And if you've seen some of my previous videos, you can guess that this game is right up my alley, and that I've already played a lot of it. I even started to make a tool-assisted long play of it, which I never finished. You can watch the first 90 minutes of this long play on my YouTube channel if you're interested. Who knows, maybe one day I'll finish this long play. Making long plays of RPGs is extremely time-consuming. This is one of the reasons why when I review RPGs, I usually use screenshots instead of gameplay footage. Also, taking screenshots of video games is something I enjoy doing. I like this game so much that I even played it once from start to finish without using save states, just like on a real Super Famicom. So it goes without saying that I really love this game. Therefore, the goal of this video is to share my love for Star Ocean with the world. It's also an excuse to play it again and try to take some cool screenshots. But if you just want to know if this game is worth playing, the answer is a resounding yes. This game is very accessible nowadays since its PSP remake, Star Ocean First Departure, has been remastered and re-released on PS4 and Nintendo Switch as Star Ocean First Departure R. But maybe because I grew up with the SNES, I prefer the graphics and music of the original SNES version. Still, the remake is perfectly fine, and maybe I'll review it someday. But today we're going to look at the original 1996 version that kicked off the amazing Star Ocean franchise. When I booted up the game, the first thing I noticed besides the beautiful title screen was how good the music sounded. The mixing and mastering of the music in Star Ocean is so good that it feels like you're listening to CD quality music. I guess they knew how good the music was, because they even included a sound player with features like equalizer presets. And it's pretty cool that the player is encrusted in a rock, like an artifact from a bygone era. And without spoiling anything, it's in line with the story of the game. Then, when you start a new game, the first thing you get to do is name the main character. The default name is Radix Ferenc, and this is the name I chose for my playthrough. After naming the main character, you are treated to a fully voiced intro. Even though they are in English, they are so compressed that I had trouble understanding some parts, and had to look online for the transcript. Still, this is pretty impressive for an SNES game. The first sentence is Captain's Log, Stardate 346. This is a direct reference to Star Trek, which seems to have been a big influence on this game. I wonder what the meaning of Stardate is. Perhaps Stardate 1 is the first year that space travel became possible? All Star Ocean games are connected by the same lore, so the answer to this question may be found in other games in the series. I'm really interested in the lore of this series, so learning more about the lore is one of my main motivations to play more Star Ocean games. This first scene may have been inspired by Star Trek, but the music that plays during this scene is just way too good for a TV show. Don't get me wrong, the music of Star Trek is amazing, but this is just on another level. It's really effective in adding a sense of mystery to the scene. It reminds me of the music in the Metroid games. Also, the fact that the credits appear on the screen during the intro makes it feel even more cinematic. Little things like this sometimes make a big difference. So in this intro, the captain of a spaceship and his crew are heading home after completing a deep space exploration mission. Suddenly, something that looks like a planet or moon is destroyed by some kind of laser. This creates a rift wave of unidentified energy. The ship is caught in this wave of mysterious energy. In the next scene, the ship seems to have survived the wave. But in his log, the captain says, "Now, through an unknown force, a totally new age is about to begin." What could this mean? Is this some 2001 Space Odyssey thing where humanity got to the next level of evolution when they came in contact with the monolith? This mysterious intro really got me hooked and made me want to dive into the game to see what would happen next. The next scene takes place in the main character's house. We went from sci-fi to fantasy. and now have a full medieval setting with characters wearing armor and swords and shields mounted on walls. The intro, which starts on a spaceship where some mysterious event happens, and then switches to a more fantasy setting, reminds me of Xenogears. I wonder if the creators of Xenogears were inspired by Star Ocean. I forgot how effective this intro is at drawing you in. Now I'm really looking forward to playing this game again. Compared to the human-looking characters on the spaceship, the characters in this medieval world have pointy ears and a tail. From this fact, we can deduce that they are from another planet. This leaves a super interesting mystery as to how these much more advanced human-looking people are connected to the story. Outside the town where the game begins, there's a crashed spaceship that doesn't fit in with the rest of the fantasy setting. Could that be the ship from the intro movie? There are also some ruins outside of the village that could indicate an ancient civilization. I love when elements of the environment hint at mystery and lore. You don't go on a world map when you leave towns, so the zones you traverse to get from one area to another have the same level of detail as towns or dungeons. This allows the game to have cool details in those zones that would be difficult to depict on a world map, such as that mysterious crashed spaceship. So the graphics in Star Ocean are really full of detail all the time, everywhere. Sometimes graphics with too much detail can look like a big messy pizza. But in Star Ocean it doesn't feel that way at all. Each color and graphic element is in harmony with each other. They are some of the best pixel art you will ever see. There's also a huge variety of graphical elements. Sometimes you can see 5 or 6 different kinds of flowers and plants on the same screen. To this day, I'm still impressed by how much effort was put into the graphics. Even the text boxes looks nice. At the beginning of the game, when Ratix reads a letter, the text box changes to a letter with a different font. I thought that was a really cool detail. And for the normal text box that you see most of the time, it has the usual white outline that we often see in JRPGs like the Final Fantasy games, but with cool little details around the edges. The background of the text box is a really nice gradient of transparent teal blue, except sometimes for the water. This color is rarely used, so it contrasts very well with the other elements of the game. You can change the color of the window, but this is by far my favorite color. And instead of the usual cursor, the rotating planet on the bottom right is a really nice touch. Speaking of things that rotate, Star Ocean has tons of animated elements everywhere. For example, the flicker of a candle, the flow of water, and even the curtains of a window gently swaying in the breeze. All these animation loops add life to the game. And something I've never seen before, the shadows of trees and buildings sometimes have diagonal lines that move. This gives the shadows a hand-colored look that looks quite nice, and those shadows are enhanced thanks to the SNES transparency capabilities. Star Ocean makes really good use of transparencies. I especially like the light effect of fires at night. For a while, transparencies were not emulated on SNES emulators, so if you played this game on an emulator back in the day, you couldn't see it in its full glory. But I noticed something strange about the shadows of the trees. Not all of them have this diagonal line effect. The art style of this game sometimes lacks consistency. For example, some enemies feel like they are from another game, and there is a very low variety of enemies in this game. You will face the same few enemies throughout the game, only with a different color palette. But this can be justified by the fact that each enemy has a rather large sprite sheet, since they are fully animated. Battles also largely use the same background tiles and character sprites as the rest of the game. They are random encounters like most old-school JRPGs, but even though they are menu-based, they are in real time. Melee attacks require your characters to run to the enemy, so if an enemy is far away, you need to take that into consideration and strategize accordingly. Also, it's better to put your high defense characters in the front row so they get targeted first. You manually select commands for Ratix, and the other characters in your party are controlled by the AI. You can choose different tactics for the AI to suit different situations. Most of the time, the battles in Star Ocean are pretty easy, but it can be challenging at times. For example, very early in the game, there's a secret cave with really strong enemies. You're not supposed to go there yet, but if you're really careful, or if you save scum with an emulator, you can explore it and get some really nice treasures. I really like that kind of optional content in games. It adds a sense of adventure and exploration to the game. Speaking of dungeons, they are pretty big. They are full of dead ends and empty rooms. It almost made me want to draw maps, as if I were playing a grid-based first-person dungeon crawler. Another aspect of Star Ocean that is reminiscent of old-school RPGs are the items. You sometimes receive unidentified items that you must identify before you can equip them. But there are also some really modern aspects to the items in Star Ocean. For example, there's an auto-equip feature that will equip the new gear you get if it's better than what you currently have. It's a nice quality of life feature that you don't often see in games of this generation. And when you equip new gear, you get a huge stat boost that makes you feel really powerful for a while. Another modern aspect of the items is that they all look different. Sure, some are just palette swaps, but it's still pretty impressive for an SNES game. The environments also have this insane level of detail and variety. For example, you can see your reflection in the water. When you walk in the sand, it leaves footprints, and you can often see birds flying above you. And those birds you see flying in the sky always look very exotic. It reminds you that you are on another planet. Also, there are some times when there is wind, and the vegetation elements are animated differently. Even in new games, this insane attention to detail is rarely seen. But sometimes something as simple as a palette swap will do the trick. For example, at the beginning of the game, you get to walk outside at night, and seeing all the vegetation in a different color palette is a nice change of pace. But the most visually striking part of Star Ocean is a room of golden statues in a temple. In terms of visual impact, it's on par with the court scene in Chrono Trigger. That being said, I feel like they went all out with the graphics at the beginning of the game to make a good impression and get you hooked. But the level of quality and detail is not consistent throughout the game. For example, there are some caves and dungeons that look a little bland compared to those early zones. They still look good, just not as impressive. They also reuse the same sprite sets for multiple towns. There are 2 ports that look exactly the same. I almost thought I was in the same town. But I'm just nitpicking. Overall, Star Ocean has some of the most beautiful environments. I especially like the zone with red trees and bluish grass. I don't mind backtracking when the environments are so beautiful. And this game has a lot of backtracking. There were a few times when I went back to earlier areas because I didn't know where to go next. This game gives you a lot of freedom and allows you to go wherever you want. It's really fun to explore and discover things, but I guess the drawback is that sometimes you can get lost and run in circles. There was even a time when a character I thought might be able to join my party left, so I tried to find her by going all the way back to the beginning of the game, but I never found her again. It took forever because this game doesn't have a world map. It wasn't clear whether I had to go after her or not. Kinda like the alignment system in D&D. Characters will join your party or not, depending on which characters are already in your party. Trying to have different party members in subsequent playthroughs adds some replayability to the game. One good thing about backtracking is that you get to farm a lot of SP during battles. SP are points that can be spent on skills. Star Ocean has a huge amount of skills. You buy them in stores. As you level specific skills, you gain abilities. These skills range from dashing, identifying items, cooking, crafting, and more. Leveling up skills and gaining new abilities is really addictive. It adds another incentive to grinding and makes it more exciting. And if you want to level everyone in your party, you're going to have to do a lot of grinding, because only the characters that you have in battles gain experience and SP. When you get new party members, they're often very low level, so it's tempting to never use them and stick with your original battle party. Another incentive to grind is a secret shop hidden in one of the towns. The items sold in this shop are extremely expensive. It's tempting to grind for money just to see what these items do. Speaking of killing monsters, when they're dead, humans can't see their corpses. Only characters from Radix's planet can see the corpses. It's like they go into another dimension that humans can't perceive. It kinda reminds me of the Gnosis from Xenosaga. It's not on the level of Xenogears, but this game still has some cool sci-fi elements that make you ponder. Another sci-fi element that emphasizes the fact that these characters are different from humans is that they have green blood. It makes sense since you are not on Earth, but I feel it was more of a censor thing than anything else. I don't think there's any deep philosophical meaning behind it. Like any good RPG, you can sometimes learn about the lore of Star Ocean by talking to NPCs. Some NPCs have interesting lines of dialogue. For example, you can play a full choose-your-own-adventure game with a girl. In the same city, there's an arena, and every NPC in the crowd says something different. I remember being quite impressed when I first realized that, in the same arena, there are puddles of water on the ground as if it just rained. You can see the clouds reflected in the puddles. It looks amazing, but going back to the dialogues in the script, sometimes they could be better. For example, you meet a character in the middle of the game that you haven't seen since the beginning of your adventure. Even though they've been looking for each other for ages, they're not that surprised to run into each other in a town like this, and it feels rather anticlimactic. I know that, with a few exceptions, the writing in video games of the time was never that great, but everything in this game is so god-tier good that I was expecting something a bit better. But having said that, I think I'm being too hard on the game, because I'm holding it to such a high standard. The game has a pretty good story overall. I especially find the lore of the game really fascinating and makes me want to play the other games in the series to learn more about it. In conclusion, Star Ocean is an amazing JRPG. Its amazing graphics, music, and atmosphere alone make it worth playing. It had been so long that I had forgotten the story, so it was fun to play it again. It was also fun to reminisce about the early emulation days. Even though I played the first Star Ocean game many times, I never played the rest of the series. Well, I played the second and third games for a few minutes at a friend's house, but that's about it. But playing this first Star Ocean game really made me want to try the other games in the franchise, and if I enjoy them, you can expect more Star Ocean content on my channel in the future. Well, that concludes my review of Star Ocean. Thanks for watching and see you in my next video.